It's been labelled as insane, it's been mocked for looking ridiculous, one driver said it was like fighting for your life, and it has opened the door for Formula 1 teams to play tricks up and down the pit lane to fool their rivals. Welcome to the world of F1 2025's pit lane games, where getting the right place in the queue for qualifying has become a big, under-the-radar battle. Success and failure for teams and drivers rest on picking the perfect spot in the traffic jam of cars that leave the pit lane for every qualifying run. Go too early and there are consequences. You lose out on the perfect track conditions when the most rubber is down on the track. Plus, there is the danger of hitting traffic on your quick lap, and that can ruin everything. But go too late and you risk getting squeezed out of the queue. And the difference between those two extremes can be down to less than 1 second in leaving the garage. Being last to set a lap may be a good thing for having the most rubber down, but sitting at the back of the pit lane queue means you are exposed to getting timed out, and maybe not getting a lap in at all. The biggest downside though is if you are last, you end up sitting stationary, stuck in a traffic jam at the end of the pit lane for more than a minute, as cars wait at the exit to leave gaps to those ahead. All that time, your tyres are losing temperature, so your qualifying preparation plans are out of the window, and your lap gets ruined anyway. It's no wonder that some drivers are singling out these crucial seconds as the key stress point of the weekend. Haas driver Esteban Ocon called it extremely difficult and stressful for the team and said the mechanics are fighting like crazy as they second guess what their rivals are doing. This is why some teams are having to prepare meticulously to try and find the sweet spot position that is somewhere near the front of the pack. But it is also why some of them are unleashing games on their rivals to trick them into jumping early or going too late. Here we explain what's opened up this new battleground and detail the tricks teams are using to fool their rivals. With the competitiveness of the field having compressed this year, and with overtaking so hard, grid positions have become critical to dictating whether weekends are average or sensational. So that means more emphasis than ever is on executing qualifying as well as possible, which means getting every detail of car preparation right. Key to this is getting tyres into the right operating window for qualifying, and being on track at the right time. In the past, the best place was almost always as the last car across the line, in order to get the best track conditions. But picking your spot on track these days has been made much harder by rules that were introduced in 2023 to prevent drivers from trying to engineer being at the back of the train by going slowly on their outlaps. Dawdling in the final corners was posing some dangers and many near misses, as cars on hot laps encountered a pack of cars idling to find clear space. So it showed that something needed to be done before there was a big crash. That chaos reached its peak at the 2019 Italian Grand Prix, when drivers ended up driving ridiculously slowly to make sure that they were not at the head of the queue and left without a slipstream. There was also the bizarre scenario of Nico Hülkenberg's Renault, the first car out of the pit, accidentally running down an escape road to lose time and drop into the pack. It didn't work as others backed off more, so Hülkenberg couldn't even benefit. And in the end, the pack of cars went so leisurely that 7 of the 9 on track failed to get across the line in time. It was the snowball effect from that madness that eventually opened the door for changes from the 2022 Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, when then F1 race director Niels Wittich introduced a maximum delta time, so minimum speed for outlap. This followed from already in place protocols that meant drivers could not go too slowly on their in-laps. From then on, drivers were forced to get their gaps before they got on track in the pit lane, which initially did not create too many problems. However, some close calls as drivers started being aggressive in overtaking in wider pit lanes, as well as the odd crunched front wing, opened the door for some further restrictions to be laid down in terms of pit lane etiquette. At the 2024 Monaco Grand Prix, Wittich introduced some revised rules in his event notes that laid out some new accepted behaviours, as well as clarifying requirements from the International Sporting Code that drivers had to blend in the fast lane of the pits as soon as they could. A new stance was imposed about getting into position in the queue. It stated, and this is something that has stayed in place ever since, that a car will be considered to be in the fast lane when a tyre has crossed the solid white line separating the fast lane from the inner lane. It was clarified that this meant that all of a tyre should be beyond the far side of the line. To stop drivers being cheeky and nudging their front tyre across the line to push in, the notes made clear that the ISC demands that they only move there without unnecessarily impeding cars which are already in the fast lane. That effectively meant that drivers coming out of their garage had to wait for gaps in the train, and also meant that those already heading to the pit exit did not have to give way to anyone waiting. This combination of protocols has opened the door to situations where, if a driver is marginally too late leaving their garage, then they do not just lose a place to 1 or 2 cars. They can go from being near the front of the queue, where the delay leaving the pits is minimal, to right at the back. And that is a nightmare to face with 20 drivers in Q1. Because with no overtaking allowed in the fast lane, plus every car at the exit waiting around 5 seconds before going out, you could be trapped for around 1 minute 40 seconds at the back of the train. Pirelli reckons that can reduce your tyre temperatures from around 115 degrees centigrade to 80 degrees. That's a big drop when the tyres in Formula 1 are so sensitive. Beyond the problems triggered by bleeding tyre temperature, if you are forced to wait too long, it also comes with the risk of you getting timed out completely and failing to be able to make it around before the end of the session if everyone has left it late. Or if you do get out in time, you can find your outlap is interrupted by other cars coming past you on hot laps, so you have to slow down, which wrecks further tyre preparation. It's no surprise that Carlos Sainz says you are fighting for your life even before you've left the pit lane in F1 qualifying nowadays. The imposition of the pit lane rules and the games they have triggered has divided opinion in the paddock. The sometimes chaotic scenes as teams try to jostle for their place in the queue and the extra stress it brings along are viewed by some as a failure of the regulations. Haas team boss Ayo Komatsu believes it's the result of a completely unnecessary maximum delta time rule. He thinks it's a byproduct of a not thought through band-aid regulation. But others accept that while the pit lane rules have created some headaches, they are only there to prevent a much bigger problem, which was the risk of crashes in the final corner because of the huge closing speeds between those drivers on push laps and those going slowly to create a gap. Aston Martin thinks it's a lot safer to move that problem away from the live racetrack into the pit lane, but it has also pointed to the game of chess that it's created. The gains that can come from getting the perfect spot in the pit lane queue, as well as the losses your rivals can experience if they're in the wrong place, are why teams have unleashed some warfare tactics in a bid to help boost their chances of getting it right. The extent of how much teams need to get on the front foot depends where they end up in the pit lane order, which is based on the previous year's Constructors' Championship. Those at the bottom end of the pit lane and nearest the pit exit have a mixed blessing of the easiest route to get out unhindered, but equally the biggest danger of missing their slot if they don't want to run first. It only takes a few cars to go a bit early and fill up the fast lane while waiting to get out for those teams' exit routes to be blocked entirely, leaving them exposed to sitting there while the rest of the pack all sail past. That is because drivers coming down the pit lane know that it is not in their interest to be polite to their rivals, so they can be pretty robust in not leaving gaps for anyone to slot in. It's perhaps then no surprise that this has led to scenarios like Nico Hülkenberg and Lance Stroll's bizarre clash in the pit lane in qualifying at the Belgian Grand Prix. Hülkenberg broke his front wing, but the stewards handed Sauber a reprimand for sending Hülkenberg into Stroll's path. Hülkenberg had no tyre of the line of the fast lane, and therefore Stroll had priority. The steward said Hülkenberg should have waited for a suitable gap and merged when one existed. On the flip side to some teams being overeager, some drivers know that a bit of a delay leaving the pits can help them in keeping tyres cool if their car likes that, so letting people in is not a problem. That is especially true if it delays rivals behind them who do not like waiting. Don't forget, every single car has different characteristics, and they all require very different outlaps to get their tyres into the optimal window. Alex Albon said some teams purposely let cars out in front of them because for them it's better to cool their tyres down before they start their outlap. At tracks like Zandvoort, the Williams' average outlaps are around 10 to 15 seconds quicker than those cars around them, so when his outlap at Zandvoort was 25 seconds slower than usual, he had no tyre temperature and tumbled out of Q2 in 15th place. Teams too are getting involved in psychological games up and down the pit lane to try and trick rivals into blinking first. Mechanics have been dispatched up and down the pit lane to pay attention to what the opposition are doing, and give a bit of a pre-warning about when it seems others are making a move to get their cars out of the garage. But this has triggered a bit of a counter-offensive approach, in that some are doing dummy moves to trick others into thinking they're about to go. Asked by The Race if teams were playing games with each other, Aston Martin's sporting director Andy Stevenson said, "Absolutely, and we're all getting used to those games." He said the teams have software on the pit wall, and they can see when engines are being turned on and off. Stevenson said the trick for the teams was to stick to their original run plans and not be fooled by what other teams are doing. The pit lane games are going to remain a part of Grand Prix racing until at least the end of this year, but how big a factor they become in 2026 will very much depend on tyre sensitivities, overtaking chances, and the closeness of the grid. There is another interesting element to next year though, and that is that with Cadillac arriving, if the games are still a part of F1, then there are going to be 2 extra cars joining in on the tactical chaos.